So, the US just made UFC an instrument of foreign policy, and Russia already knew that was coming. This Thursday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is signing a formal memorandum of understanding with UFC President Dana White at the State Department. An official public-private partnership, sports diplomacy, UFC as a tool of American soft power abroad. And honestly, strange, maybe, but not a crazy idea. UFC might sound like an odd vehicle for diplomacy. After all, it's a sport built around two people trying to knock each other out. But sports, in general, have always been one of DC's most effective soft power tools. Billions of people watch UFC worldwide. It's one of the fastest growing sports organizations on the planet. Trump loves it. Dana White is one of his closest allies. The White House is literally hosting a UFC fight on its South Lawn next week. But here's the thing. While Washington was only drafting that memorandum, Russia was already at the table. Not at the State Department table, at a different table entirely in St. Petersburg, with a man who advises on Trump's ballroom. I'm Alexandra Filippenko. I cover the US-Russia relations and Russian politics, and what happened at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum is one of the most clarifying things I've seen in a long time. Not because Russia did something amazing or shocking, but because they did something smart, evil smart, and it worked. Now, please like and subscribe, and let's get into it. Because St. Petersburg was a masterclass. Let me remind you of a man named Kirill Dmitriev. He's Putin's special envoy, Harvard-educated, and probably the most sophisticated operator in the Kremlin. And he is a friend of Jared Kushner. They got to know each other through business activities in Saudi Arabia. Dmitriev consciously sees himself as the Russian version of Kushner, not a formal official, but someone with privileged and personal access to the inner circle of the president through family ties. Well, yeah, Dmitriev is trying to mirror the image of Kushner. And for over a year now, Dmitriev has been very publicly, very deliberately pushing two Trump-related ideas. First, UFC should come back to Russia. This is not random. UFC held events in Russia in 2018 and 2019, Moscow twice, St. Petersburg once. Then came the pandemic and the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Sanctions and isolation. UFC pulled out, and Dmitriev has been trying to pull it back ever since. In March last year, right after a Russian fighter won the UFC light heavyweight championship, Dmitriev went on X and told Russian fans to follow the news and believe in UFC's return. After Trump attended a UFC event in Miami, Dmitriev posted again, "We're working on the return of UFC tournaments to Russia."
Champion of the world,
He said he hoped Russian and American fighters would be competing on Russian soil by the end of 2025. It didn't happen, but UFC President Dana White himself confirmed that negotiations on UFC's return to Russia were underway. He said, "Trump and Putin have to figure things out. You know what I mean." Yes, Mr. White, we know what you mean. But what does it all actually mean? Dmitriev is not a sports promoter. He's a diplomatic operator. And the message he's sending is not to Russian MMA fans. It is to one person. A person who was ringside in Miami, a person whose closest ally runs the UFC, a person who next week is hosting a fight at the White House. UFC is not a sports proposal. It's a Trump proposal, delivered as diplomacy. And then there's a second idea Dmitriev has been pushing for over a year now. a proposal to build a tunnel under the Bering Strait, connecting Russia's Chukotka region to Alaska, 70 miles of underwater infrastructure linking two countries. Dmitriev called it the Putin-Trump Tunnel. Well, obviously. Dmitriev didn't present it to the State Department. Dmitriev didn't present it to Congress. He posted it on social media and addressed directly to Elon Musk. Imagine connecting the US and Russia, the Americas and Eurasia. Let's build a future together, Dmitriev wrote. Well, yeah, this is Russia's mood board. What Dmitriev is actually selling, a massive construction project named after Trump, connecting two continents. That's legacy. And then, at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, Dmitriev announced that Russia and the United States would sign a formal agreement the very next day to continue designing the tunnel. What a historic moment, what a breakthrough. Well, there were just two problems. First of all, they never signed it. And then, even if they did, who could be on the American side of that signing at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum? Was it supposed to be Steven Seagal, who was present at the forum, or maybe Rodney Mims Cook Jr.? Who is Rodney Mims Cook Jr.? Russian state media called him the head of the first U.S. official delegation to St. Petersburg since 2017. They ran it as breaking news. Every major Russian state outlet treated his arrival as a diplomatic triumph. Secretary of State Marco Rubio asked about this delegation at the hearing, said he was not aware of any official delegation attending, because Rodney Mims Cook Jr. is the chairman of the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts, a body that advises the Trump administration on architecture, monuments, and the design of historic buildings in Washington. His most prominent current project is ensuring that Trump's new White House ballroom is sufficiently classical in style. He is, in the most literal sense, a man building Trump's ballroom, and the Kremlin introduced him to the world as America's diplomatic representative. And yeah, I saw a lot of American commentators laughing at it. Fair enough, fair enough. But Russia was not embarrassed. Russia got exactly what it wanted. For the Russian domestic audience, the title doesn't matter. What matters is an American. Moreover, a Trump-appointed American stood in that hall in St. Petersburg. Russian state television ran it on a loop. The message to the Russian public was clear. We are not isolated. They are coming back to us. And then Cook stood up at the plenary session and said on stage, in front of Putin, in front of the cameras, "And of course, I would also like to convey greetings from your good friend, President Trump." And Putin's response? He didn't say, "Convey my regards." He said, "Передавайте ответную шайбу президенту Трампу." Thank you for the greetings from Washington. Pass the puck back to President Trump. The puck. At a forum where Russia is actively lobbying to bring UFC back to Moscow, Putin chose a sports metaphor to send a message back. Well, this is not coincidence. This is a man who understands his audience completely. And let's stay with that for a moment. Rubio told the Congress he knew nothing about the official delegation, and yet the man who showed up in St. Petersburg carried personal greetings from the President of the United States to Vladimir Putin. This is not a freelance architect on a cultural tourism trip. That is a back channel. And all of this, the UFC, the tunnel, the ballroom architect delivering presidential greetings, all of it was happening together with Putin's peace message at the Economic Forum. Russia is ready to negotiate. Russia wants a deal. Russia is willing to compromise. No need for a ceasefire. First, better to end the war entirely. Yeah. You have heard this before, and you will hear it again. But that message is not directed at Ukraine or anyone who is following what's happening, because Ukraine knows exactly what Russian readiness to negotiate looks like. They've been watching it from the receiving end of missile strikes for years. And of course, it's not directed at Europe, which has largely just stopped listening to Putin. It is directed at one person. Trump doesn't need to be convinced that Russia is acting in good faith. He needs permission to believe it. There's a difference, because the alternative is really uncomfortable. If Russia is not negotiating seriously, if Putin is stalling and buying time, then Ukraine is right. And if Ukraine is right, then the people who have been saying, give them weapons, hold the line, it's very serious, were right all along. And that's a conclusion that costs something for Trump politically, first of all. So when Dmitriev offers a tunnel with Trump's name on it, when he dangles UFC fights in Moscow, when a Trump-appointed official lands in St. Petersburg and gets treated like an ambassador and carries greetings back and forth between two presidents, Trump doesn't have to believe any of it is real. He just needs enough to point to, enough to say, look, things are moving, we're talking, there's momentum. Russia isn't fooling Trump. Russia is giving Trump permission to believe what he already wants to believe. And they've been doing it methodically, item by item, for over a year now. The UFC, the tunnel, the forum, the architect, each one is a small piece of a very deliberate picture. Evil smart, but smart. The question is, what happens to the US and its statue in the world while that picture is being painted for the White House? From KGB with love. I'm Alexandra Filippenko. Like, and I'll see you at the next one.